I mentioned this one before, 2,000 Years of Mayan Literature. Nice little thick book, put together by Dennis Tedlock, who's one of the guys that did one of the better translations of the Popol Vuh. And it's really beautiful the way he's put this together in terms of Mayan hieroglyphics, translations, explaining of some of the translations. This kind of goes good with the Michael Coe book on breaking the Mayan code. And when you think about it, you know, I've done this example, putting together a whole bunch of the books of our literature. That's bigger than what the Bible is. That's bigger than, one of the books mentions that that's more literature that has survived than has actually survived from the Greeks. And when I first heard that, I'm going, when you put it together, all the Greek material, the plays and the philosophy and all of that, it's not that much material. And if this much has survived of our material, imagine all of what was burned and destroyed. And this is something that's got to get into our heads somewhere. You know, wait a minute, they destroyed our literature, they destroyed our leadership, they destroyed who we are as human beings. And then for those of you who've traveled to the archaeological sites and you say, okay, yeah, well, some of these were already in ruins. But again, what you don't see are the cities that existed at the time that basically were leveled altogether. Or you can see actually in what's called Mexico City, you can see Tenochtitlan underneath. You can go to Cholula and you can see just this huge hill, which is a Teocalli. But not very much left is left of Cholula, which was one of the top 5 cities. Or you can go to a place called Huechotzinco, which was, again, one of the top cities, and nothing much left to see. And somehow, somewhere down the road, there's got to be a movie that shows what our world was like. And that was kind of one of the things about seeing Avatar, that showing that what you can do with a new technology, you don't have to go out and build the sets of a whole Tenochtitlan and a whole Cholula. They can do it in such a way that the costs won't be as, you know, impossible as they were at one point. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, is see if we can stimulate our own people, you know, the youngsters who will go into the film school and make these films so that we can see, you know, what was Tenochtitlan before the Europeans got here, not just about what the monstrosities of what the Europeans did, but to do a story on, say, Nezahualcóyotl, to do a story on Itzcoatl, to do a story on Pacal, the Maya. There's a whole bunch of stories that can be done to inspire our people. This is called Sweeping the Way, Divine Transformation in the Aztec Festival of Oxpan Eastli. This, again, because throughout the year there were a lot of rituals and ceremonies that were taking place. And Catherine de Cesare has decided to invest years of her life in preparing this one book. Meanwhile, what are our people dedicating years of their life into? Again, we have to kind of take a little gauge of reality of what's going on. This one's kind of a little off from there, but it's called First Peoples in the New World. And it's talking about how our people came here, you know, this whole thing about the Clovis and blah, blah, blah. But it gets to a section in here about Kennewick Man. And again, this is what makes this book really important, in that basically it says, hey, Kennewick Man has already been proven that it wasn't a white man. It's been proven that the major distortion that came about is when they found the skeleton, or the skull more specific, there's an art to creating what that face looks like. And so it's more art than science. And this guy goes through explaining how that guy who originally put it together, and that the guy, this is kind of the sick part, he had been watching Star Trek and watching the, what's it, Luke, John Luke or whatever the captain's name. And he admits that somehow that did influence how he was shaping this face. But then on the other hand, when I first saw it, I didn't see anything European about it. It looked for me like the so-called Indian nickel. Yeah, have some of you seen that old Indian nickel? Again, looked like, for me, it looks like the guy on the nickel. So this guy goes into it in detail, basically explaining how Kennewick Man was never anything about Caucasoid. That was what was described by the white people who found it. They're the ones who characterized it. They're the ones who wove all this. But when they got into it, it's got nothing to do with Caucasian. The real sick part is where the white supremacists, see, that was a white man. If anything, it would have been Caucasoid. Caucasoid doesn't mean European. But it's not even that. So for those of you who are looking for the proof of the, I wasn't aware of all the studies that have been done on it, because mostly what you find on YouTube or on the internet is all the white supremacist stuff, where they're going about Kennewick Man. And see, we were here first, you know. So if there was no Kennewick Man, then what? Then you would have left? See, again, back to that coin. Heads they win, tails we lose. And we're saying, well, that sounds fair. I mean, we didn't even think about some of this stuff. So that's the Kennewick Man. I mentioned before this one, the allure of Nezahualcóyotl, pre-Hispanic history, religion, and Nahua poetics. Big focus on Nezahualcóyotl. This one you have to be a little bit more cautious, okay, because of this guy who's writing it. He's got not a great reputation. But there hasn't been much written on Nezahualcóyotl for a few decades now. But that gets back to the when you're reading books, these books, you have to be very careful. You have to kind of use a filter through it. And that's why we give you guys a recommendation of books to read first. Because sometimes people get caught in, oh yeah, I read Aztec by Gary Jennings. I know what the history is all about. Again, first of all, that's not history, it's a novel. Novel is fiction, it's something made up. You don't quote novels, you know, even if it's Gone with the Wind or whatever. You don't quote it as history. But we have a lot of our people, they read Gary Jennings and they're, oh yeah, but that helped me get my culture and understand, and they don't get it. They don't get it. One notorious guy I argued with, trying to explain to him the difference between nonfiction and fiction. And he didn't get, to this day, he doesn't get it. You wouldn't do that with novelas and say, yeah, I learned all about history by watching novelas. You don't do that with novels. You don't do that with any kind of fiction. And there's a lot of fiction out there and people are reading it as history. And that's something that's doing a lot of damage. That's kind of a little bit of what Zilalis was talking about earlier. And then there's this, again, this is a lot more, I guess, more technical in a way. But those who are studying Now What is a book, it's called Here in This Year. And it's about Tlaxcala, which we don't get to hear that much about Tlaxcala, which again was also a major city. The Tlaxcalans were the ones who sided with the Spaniards. You would think when the war was all over, Tlaxcala would be the capital of Anahuac. But something went wrong. Something went very wrong. The Tlaxcalans thought they were just getting allies in a war, which wouldn't have been if there was no smallpox involved and they had just used them for mercenaries, and then Tlaxcalans would be in charge of Anahuac. Okay, just another war. But they did not really hire mercenaries. They basically acquired masters. And they became slaves just like the rest of us.